Welcome to Emotive, the intro episode. I'm your host, Dan, also known as Orangesherbet, and this episode is here so you can get to know me a little better and get some context for terminology that will be used during the show. Here's a little bit about myself and why I use the alias Orangesherbet. I'm 37 years old and I currently live in the state of Colorado. Video games have always been a social experience for me, going back to my childhood. Some of my best memories from back then are playing games with friends. I don't play video games as much as I used to, but I still love the interaction of playing games with friends, mostly on the internet now. Over the last 9 years, I've spent a considerable amount of time on a website called twitch.tv as a broadcaster. Orangesherbet is an alias I use on twitch.tv. Before I give the story of my alias, I want to explain what twitch.tv is. Reading from the twitch.tv wiki, Twitch is defined as a live streaming video platform owned by Twitch Interactive, a subsidiary of Amazon. Introduced in June 2011 as a spin-off of the general interest streaming platform Justin.tv, the site primarily focuses on video game live streaming, including broadcasters of esports competitions, in addition to music broadcasts, creative content, and more recently, in real live streams. Content on the site can be viewed either live or via video on demand. I've been a broadcaster, or commonly known as streamer, on Twitch since 2010, when the site was still known as Justin.tv. The overview of all that information and what isn't explained on that wiki page is, people tune into a channel on Twitch where someone is playing a video game, creating something, or just talking to the audience, and that audience can type back to the broadcaster, or chat with each other, and that community aspect is what made Twitch what it is today. My alias Orangesherbet came one day in 2012 by way of a job I had at the time. I was working as a merchandiser for a frozen foods company, and part of that was the ice cream, and the aforementioned sherbet, which always seemed to have a bit leaking out of the lid, onto the side of the container, which in turn would end up on my gloves, and on the day in question, in between the webbing of my fingers. On that day, when I needed to choose a username in order to chat with people on Twitch, I had just gotten home from work, and I thought I had washed my hands, but I noticed a bit of bright orange sherbet was still stuck in there between my fingers. So that became my alias, and here we are almost 7 years later. So what is Emotive and what will this podcast be? Here's a recording from a recent live stream I did with my friend herbbug, who I'll be introducing in a later episode. Well, let me explain to people what the idea for the podcast is. I've been thinking about it for probably 5 years, and that doesn't mean that I've been working on it for 5 years. I wanted to do my own. I wanted to have its own unique spin. I didn't want to copy somebody else's format. I've been inspired by like the generic like archetypes of podcasting. So like Joe Rogan, Radio Lab, and then more recently, I listen to a lot of like true crime podcasts and stuff like that. But like some sort of a combination between an open discussion with some context with like a story behind it, right? That's the type of stuff that I like listening to. But yeah, it was probably 2012 when I really got into listening to podcasts, when I was like riding bike, or I was at the gym, or I was on a long drive. It was great. And I've been too chicken to like start my own, because I realized how important it is to make a good first impression upon people, because I know how I am with my attention span. If somebody doesn't grab my attention within the first 30 seconds, I'm going to flip the channel. If the audio sucks, I'm gonna turn it off. You know, that's why I've been trying to be like super careful about how I go about it. And that's why I've been so scared, right? But a couple of years ago, I really started to dislike how social media and overall just news media affected me. And it kind of turned me into a weird person. And as I realized it made me angry. And at that time, now you just have to bear with me. I wanted to start a podcast where I was going to be like the objective new. I was going to like take news stories and look at them in an objective way. And I was going to cut through all the bullshit. And I was just going to get straight to the facts. And I was going to call it like the objective cast or something really dumb. And the more that I thought about it, the more I realized how like naive I was then. And I didn't realize that I was just as bad as everybody else. I'm just as affected by things as everybody else. I'm just as emotional. I'm just as like biased. I create my own biases. I think it's natural. So I was thinking about names for the podcast, and in one day I just thought of the word emotive, and I thought it was kind of cool because it ties into Twitch, because Twitch uses emotes. We use emotes on Twitch. It's a big part of the Twitch culture, right? But looking at the definition of it, it does have some negative connotations to it. Emotive, if you search on Google, it means arousing or able to arouse intense feeling, or expressing a person's feelings rather than being neutrally or objectively descriptive. And a lot of people nowadays want to be like on one side or the other, right? They want to be objective, or they just want to be reactionary. But I think that we all have our own emotions and biases. So like ignoring that and like getting on your high horse is kind of just unproductive. And you should like recognize that you do have biases and just work on yourself. And that was that's where I landed on the idea for the podcast. I decided to call it Emotive, and that's where we are, man. Just because the show is called Emotive, it doesn't mean that this is like a reaction show or something like that. The idea is that I do like tend to focus on things that I react to more, like things that I actually care about, right? All right, well, that's it for this episode. I hope that provided a little bit more context for some of the elements of the show, like twitch.tv and people using aliases, which a lot of the guests that I have on will be using their aliases, just because some people prefer to use their alias when they're online because they want to separate their personal and internet lives. Additionally, I'll be providing links to all of the resources needed to read more about what I was talking about on the show. Those will be in the description of the episode. If you have questions for me, because I'm sure that I left a lot unsaid here, I didn't want to go into my entire life story. I didn't want to go into my entire gaming history as well. I think that some of that will come out through some of my conversations. But if you do have any specific questions, I'm always open to hearing them. You can find me at Emotive Podcast on Twitter for the show, and my personal Twitter handle is at Orangesherb. You can also email the show with questions, emotivepodcast@gmail.com. Hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.